The morning sun rose quietly over the rolling hills of Ridge County, spreading a golden light over miles of open land. For years, that land had been untouched, a sea of grass, dotted with oaks and stones, and bordered by an old fence that had weathered countless storms. To most people, it was just another piece of forgotten countryside. But to Daniel Warren, it was everything. Daniel inherited that land from his grandfather, a farmer who had worked it until the very last day of his life. The deed had passed from hand to hand through 3 generations, and Daniel had always seen it not as a property but as a legacy. He never built on it, never sold it, he just kept it, as if guarding the last quiet piece of his family's story. For years, Daniel's life was simple. He lived in a small cabin on the edge of town, worked as a carpenter, and visited the land every Sunday. He'd walk the perimeter, check the fences, and sit by the lone oak tree in the middle of the field. It was peaceful, until one day, it wasn't. The first sign. It started with the noise, the deep, rhythmic growl of engines. One early morning, while Daniel was driving by, he saw bulldozers at the far end of his land. At first, he thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe the county was fixing a road or clearing brush. But as he got closer, his heart began to race. There were survey markers, construction vehicles, and a large sign hammered into the ground. Future site of Ridgeline Heights, a proud HOA community. Daniel slammed on the brakes, his old truck groaning in protest. He climbed out, dust swirling around his boots, and stared at the sign in disbelief. Ridgeline Heights, HOA community, he whispered. He walked toward the site, waving to one of the men in hard hats. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The man shrugged. "Clearing for development. HOA's putting in about 96 homes here. Gonna be a big one." Daniel frowned. "But this is private land." The man looked confused. "You should talk to the project manager, buddy. We've got all the permits." That was the first time Daniel heard the name Ridgeline Development Group, and it wouldn't be the last. The paper chase. Daniel spent the next week buried in paperwork, driving between the county records office, the zoning department, and even the local courthouse. Everywhere he went, people gave him the same polite but dismissive answer: "Sir, according to our system, this land is under development by the HOA." They purchased it 2 years ago. Purchased it from who? Daniel demanded. No one could tell him. So he did what his grandfather would have done. He went home, unlocked an old metal box under his bed, and pulled out the original deed. There it was, his grandfather's signature, dated 1954. Every transfer, every seal, every recorded tax payment since then. It was all there, legal and intact. And yet, the HOA had somehow claimed his land and was now building homes across every acre of it. Daniel wanted to storm onto the site and shut everything down immediately. But something stopped him. A quiet thought, sharp and steady. Let them build. Watching the mistake grow, weeks turned into months, and Daniel watched as the open land transformed into a sprawling neighborhood. Roads were paved, houses took shape, and playgrounds appeared where wildflowers used to grow. He'd drive by sometimes at dusk, watching the construction lights flicker in the distance. Trucks rumbled, workers shouted, and rows of identical roofs rose against the horizon. It was painful to watch, but he stayed silent. People in town began to whisper. "Didn't that used to be Daniel's land? I heard the HOA bought it." "No, I think he sold it." Daniel said nothing. He let them talk. He paid his taxes. Quietly, kept the deed locked away, and waited. The day of completion. Nearly 2 years later, Ridgeline Heights was finished. 96 beautiful homes stood neatly along wide streets lined with trees and new grass. There were playgrounds, mailboxes, and a big stone sign at the entrance. Ridgeline Heights, a community of pride. Daniel drove up to that sign one sunny morning, parked his truck, and stepped out. He stood there for a while, just looking. A police officer on patrol noticed him and walked over. "Everything all right, sir?" the officer asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "Everything's fine, officer. Just admiring what they built." The officer nodded politely and drove off. Daniel reached into his jacket, felt the folded paper, the deed, and whispered, "It's time." The courtroom day. 2 weeks later, Daniel walked into the Ridge County Courthouse with quiet confidence. The courtroom was crowded. The HOA's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man with silver hair, stood at the front beside the HOA president, a woman in a bright pink suit, her face tight with annoyance. She glared at Daniel as he took his seat. The judge entered. "We're here for the case of Warren versus Ridgeline Heights HOA. Mr. Warren, you may proceed." Daniel stood up slowly. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "Your Honor, my family has owned the land at Ridge County Lot 32 for over 70 years. 2 years ago, the Homeowners Association began construction on that property, my property, without my knowledge or consent." The HOA lawyer immediately jumped in. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The HOA legally purchased the land through a county-approved sale." Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, worn folder. He walked to the judge and handed it over. "Here's the original deed, Your Honor. My grandfather signed it in 1954. Every tax payment since then has been made in my name. You can check the county's records." The courtroom fell silent. The judge flipped through the papers, brows furrowing deeper with each page. The clerk pulled up digital records, and soon enough, the truth was clear: the land had never been sold. A clerical error, or perhaps deliberate manipulation, had allowed the HOA's developer to claim ownership based on falsified documents. The judge looked up. "Mr. Warren is the rightful owner. The HOA built on private land without legal title." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The HOA president's face went pale. The aftermath. Over the next few months, the story spread everywhere: local papers, radio, even television. People were shocked that an entire housing community had been built on land that didn't belong to the HOA. The homeowners of Ridgeline Heights were furious. Some blamed the HOA, others demanded refunds or new deeds. Lawyers flooded the county offices. Daniel, however, didn't gloat. He stayed quiet, patient as ever. Eventually, the county court gave him the final say. Since the homes stood on his land, he owned them too. 96 homes. Every single one. It was more than he ever wanted, and far more than he ever asked for. Developers came knocking with offers worth millions. Reporters wanted interviews. But Daniel turned them all away. He drove to the old oak tree in the middle of what used to be his family's field. The tree was still there, surrounded now by neat lawns and sidewalks. He sat under it, remembering the days when the only sound here was the wind and the birds. A few of the new homeowners came by, curious. "You're the man who owns this place now, right?" one asked. Daniel nodded softly. "Seems that way. What are you going to do with it all?" Daniel smiled. "Haven't decided yet. Maybe let people stay. Maybe start something new. A quiet victory. Weeks passed, and life in Ridgeline Heights began to adjust. The HOA dissolved under lawsuits and debts. The pink-suited president resigned, disappearing from public sight. The houses remained, though, quiet reminders of arrogance and oversight. Daniel didn't sell the land. Instead, he restructured it. He allowed the families who'd already moved in to stay under new, fair agreements. No more HOA fees, no more rules about mailbox colors or lawn heights. Just live peacefully, he told them. Many of them thanked him with tears in their eyes. For the first time, the neighborhood felt like a real community, one built on fairness, not control. Daniel spent his evenings walking the streets that had once been empty fields. Children played where his grandfather's crops once grew. The smell of dinner drifted from open windows. The laughter reminded him that sometimes, justice doesn't have to destroy, it can heal, too. The lesson of the land. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Daniel stood again at the edge of the neighborhood. The same place where it all began. The wind carried the faint sound of voices and the hum of life, something his land hadn't known in decades. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once built furniture, repaired fences, and held his grandfather's shovel. Now, they held something else, the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd protected his legacy without shouting, without violence, without bitterness. Sometimes, he thought, people rush to fight. They shout, they sue, they demand. But sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do, is wait. He waited while they built. He watched as they laid every brick, painted every wall, paved every street, all on his land. And when the time was right, he pulled out the one thing that mattered, the deed. That simple piece of paper, yellowed with age and stained by time, spoke louder than any lawyer ever could. It was proof that patience, truth, and quiet resolve still had power in a world that often forgets such things. Epilogue. Years later, people still talk about what happened at Ridgeline Heights. They say the man who owned the land was clever, that he planned it all along. But those who met Daniel know the truth: he didn't plan for revenge or fortune. He just wanted respect. He wanted the world to remember that ownership is not about power, but about honor, the kind that runs deeper than money or laws. As the sun set behind the new homes, Daniel locked the deed away again. Not in a courtroom, not in a bank, but in the same old metal box, under his bed. Right where it had always been. The land was his. It always had been. And now, everyone finally knew it.